Hi, I'm Heather McLean, and this is the Alliance Against Northern Pass. Today we're interviewing Christophe Courchesne from the Conservation Law Foundation in Concord, New Hampshire, and we are here to talk about the Northern Pass project. And we've got lots of questions today for Christophe, so hopefully you're ready to answer them. Of course you always are.
I'm glad to be here and happy to talk with you again.
Yes, excellent. Okay, so we wanted to start this conversation today talking about the ISO New England recent report about energy efficiency and how it was decided by ISO New England through studies that both New Hampshire and Vermont do not need any new power lines or upgrades for 10 years, which illustrates the fact that we do not need the Northern Pass. Northern Pass is not needed to keep the lights on. So I wanted to ask you about that first and see what you had to say about it.
Sure. What the ISO did was it basically looked at the effect of energy efficiency programs that the states have put in place over the last decade or so to reduce our energy use and reduce customer costs. And so they put together a forecast of how much energy was going to be saved by these programs, and they incorporated it really in a very innovative way for the first time into their forecast of the region's energy needs.
Okay.
Most people have assumed for the last several years that although energy demand is not increasing rapidly, that it will increase by some amount. What this energy efficiency forecast showed was that with the programs that are already in place, assuming they continue, New England as a whole, and some states other than New Hampshire in particular, have such aggressive energy efficiency goals that in fact demand will either be flat or decline over the 10-year planning period. So what that essentially means is that the assumption that demand is always going to increase is not entirely accurate. And a lot depends on whether these energy efficiency programs get implemented, whether they get expanded. New Hampshire, for example, is one of the states that's characterized as falling behind on energy efficiency because we only invest about $17 million a year in that enterprise. So compared to other states like Massachusetts and Connecticut, have much more aggressive energy efficiency investments. But that's where all the power demand is anyway, so that's helpful to the entire region. And it's helpful for a couple reasons. It helps if you have energy efficiency in commercial and industrial and residential settings, because it reduces that demand that the system is built to support. So you have a electric system that's built around supplying power on the highest demand days in winter and summer, and particularly in summer in New England. So you have all these power plants that some of which sit idle for most of the year, but turn on just so that we can run our air conditioners on those days where it's 100 degrees.
Oh.
That's really what the system's built to support.
Okay.
And what energy efficiency measures do is if you make your house, if you air seal your house, if you make sure that all those air conditioners you're using are operating in the most efficient way possible, you shave some of that demand off the top.
Right.
There's other programs called demand response, which allow, big buildings, big manufacturers to basically get compensated for shutting down some of their lines in those high demand periods. Not coincidentally, that's the time when, on those high demand points, when energy costs go through the roof, when the cost of electricity is very high. So energy efficiency has this great benefit of shaving those peaks, and that reduces everyone's costs, and it obviously improves the environment because it means you don't have to burn coal, oil, or natural gas to fulfill that energy need. So you're getting rid of all those emissions associated with, having those power plants operating. So it's a real, energy efficiency is kind of called the classic win-win, and what ISO New England did was just incorporate all those programs into their planning. So one of the striking things that they found was that if you incorporate all those findings, all those forecast findings into the planning, you don't need to build about $260 million worth of new transmission for the region.
Okay.
That was previously planned, assuming that increase in demand and the distribution of where the what's called the load will be located on on an ongoing basis. And it gives you this by deploying energy efficiency, you get this tremendous benefit. So you don't need to build as much transmission as you otherwise would. That's $260 million of savings.
Mm-hmm.
Those are savings that all New England ratepayers will benefit from, because it means that the utilities aren't going out making these investments in these big upgrades. And this is a reason why, from the very beginning of the Northern Pass controversy, we've been suggesting one of the key alternatives that the permitting agencies need to take into consideration is there a better way to supply the power needs for the region than importing more hydropower from Canada? And one of the key strategies is increasing deployment of energy efficiency. And what this ISO New England report says to us is there's lots more progress we can make in reducing demand and thereby meeting some of the needs that supposedly this project would respond to, these long-term needs that the proponents of the project talk about.
Okay, so then that establishes sort of what's going on in New England right now, and yet the Northern Pass is soldiering on, buying land. So I wanted to talk a little bit about PSNH's role in that, how they are their parent company is Northeast Utilities, so the Northern Pass ultimately is a venture between Hydro-Quebec of Canada and Northeast Utilities, which then funnels that power down through the state through PSNH's right-of-way. So I wanted to have you kind of explain to people a little bit about that piece of it.
So the utilities involved, as you mentioned, Northeast Utilities and PSNH, it's been striking to us that this really is a Northeast Utilities project, but it's been marketed and discussed, and the spokespeople are all from PSNH.
Mm-hmm.
PSNH has a tremendous amount of presence in New Hampshire. It has political power, and Northeast Utilities, that's their agent in New Hampshire. And we've seen that that's really been the strategy. The project avoids Vermont and Maine. It only goes through New Hampshire, despite the presence of an existing line that goes from the Vermont border down through Massachusetts, the Phase 2 existing line, which we've discussed as, it's a viable option to expand that or consider how that might be improved and the capacity of that line increased. But instead, we have a kind of a brand new line that will be sited in New Hampshire. So there's a political element to PSNH's involvement. There's also a economic imperative for PSNH.
Yes, for PSNH.
For PSNH. So there's a chain of economic benefits associated with this project. Hydro-Quebec gets to sell more of its power, generate more profits. Northeast Utilities gets what's called what's essentially called a return on equity for the physical plant that it builds in the state. So it gets a profit, which Hydro-Quebec will then pay of $68 million a year, in addition to getting all sorts of, getting all its costs of building the line paid for by Hydro-Quebec.
So that's the ultimate goal, is to have Hydro-Quebec pay for all of this.
That's the way this is structured is for Hydro-Quebec to sell power into the New England market.
Yep.
make enough of a margin that it can then pay back the construction costs associated with building the new transmission. So Northeast Utilities gets its return on equity from Hydro-Quebec in yearly payments. And so that's a revenue stream for them.
Yes.
That's
important.
It's like important. A toll. It's like a toll that Hydro-Quebec's paying to use this line. And that's been approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in a special approval that they received beginning in 2009, and the more recent detailed approval was in 2011. So you have Northeast Utilities, you have Hydro-Quebec, and then you have the third player, PSNH, which is really a part of Northeast Utilities, and is really a number of different businesses wrapped into one. There's a power plant business, which is in very difficult shape right now.
Is that the $422 million scrubber situation?
Yes.
Okay.
So they've invested a lot of money in their old antiquated facilities. They have coal-fired power plants in Bow and in Portsmouth, and they also have a oil natural gas facility in Newington. They own a number of other smaller generating facilities, and they have a number of special agreements with, for example, the Lamster Wind Farm, and soon to be the Berlin biomass plant as well.
Okay.
So, and they have a number of other special agreements. So that's how they are supposed to provide power to their customers. In the last year or so, and going back really to the mid-2000s, it became pretty clear to many people that relying on these old power plants that aren't actually that are very inefficient. They're very dirty. Still the top two toxic polluters in the state, Bow and Portsmouth, those power plants, and it's really become evident that their costs are exceeding other utilities' costs for getting power. And so you have a situation where PSNH is now charging, as of January 1st, 2013, a 9.54 cents per kilowatt hour rate for its energy supply.
And what is it normally in most of the other
I'll give you 2 points of comparison.
Okay.
In Liberty Utilities and Unitil and the Co-op, the other big utilities in New Hampshire, they're not very big in comparison to PSNH, but they do have some territory in New Hampshire. Their rates are between even the high 6 cents per kilowatt hour to the low 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're talking about almost a 40% premium over those rates. But I think the more telling comparison is actually with PSNH's sister utility, NSTAR, which is also part of the Northeast Utilities system. So it's the same company.
Yeah.
For customers in Massachusetts who have NSTAR, current rate is 6.69 cents per kilowatt hour.
I don't get it.
We're talking about almost a 3-cent premium to support PSNH's business model, which is based on these old power plants and paying excessive costs associated with them when there are cheaper, cleaner things on the market that everyone else is taking advantage of. And there's another component to it, that PSNH owns power plants. None of the other utilities own power plants, including NSTAR.
Right.
So PSNH wants to make an investment in a power plant. It decides to do that, and then it goes into the Public Utilities Commission and seeks approval for that investment. Any other business, any other company that you can think of makes an investment on the prospect that it's going to make them more competitive.
Right.
And then they sell their product in the market, and hopefully they make back that investment. That's the risk that they're taking. PSNH has really none of that risk, or at least very little of that risk, because it simply needs to go get the regulator to approve that investment. And then the ratepayers pay for it.
And
regardless,
Yeah, and there's been talk about the PSNH captured PUC.
I would say that the PUC has been trying to deal with what's a difficult system for a while. We partially deregulated in New Hampshire, which means we partially let the power plants go out and try to compete in the marketplace. And so you see the natural gas plant in Londonderry, for example, and most of the other power plants in the state, Seabrook, these other power plants, they are no longer owned by the utilities that supply your power to your house. They're owned by private companies, often public companies that are investing in the prospect of making returns on selling the power into the regional grid or to individual customers in a free market environment. It's not the case for PSNH. PSNH is still a cost of service. It's called regulation, regulated entity, regulated public utility, and it's very much the way things used to be done all over the place, and it's really changed. PSNH is still in that category, and there's a long story to that, and I won't go into it why that's the case, but it does mean that PSNH is in a very difficult situation when the cost of power in the market is lower than their own costs to produce power at their power plants. And that's the situation we have now. Customers are leaving PSNH. You've probably seen the commercials for the competitive suppliers.
I left PSNH.
You can change that part of your bill.
Yeah, I did.
And it's something that not everyone may know about, but it's a very important thing to think about.
It made a difference in my electric bill.
And it's going to make an increasing difference because you get the opportunity by changing your supplier to make your power supply much cleaner and at this point much cheaper. It's really hard to see why you would stay with PSNH. There's really no reason. You continue to get your supply from you continue to get your service from PSNH so that they'll come out and help you in any outage situation, and they have to continue to operate the lines. As I said, PSNH is a bunch of different companies, and one of them is the lines company, very different than the power plant company. It's a different division of the company. And so you're just simply saying, I don't want your dirty power, PSNH. I'd like to go with what the market's providing.
Okay.
So that's the economic situation PSNH finds itself in. It's losing customers.
So this Northern Pass project is something that they might see as a way to help them bring in some revenue?
So yes, they will. PSNH will get some undisclosed amount for use of that transmission corridor that they already own. PSNH owns that. It's been part of what's called the rate base assets that PSNH has. It's been something that ratepayers in New Hampshire paid for while they were being built, and it's something that PSNH is now trying to monetize in a new way. And they will then get Hydro-Quebec, according to the agreements, will pay them either a rental fee or some other type of payment, which will likely be a substantial sum, and will be a way to shore up PSNH's finances.
All right. So far we've established that Northeast Utilities receives money from this. PSNH receives money from this project. And let's talk about the shareholders and the deregulation of these transmission lines and how there's an incentive to build these transmission lines because of the margin of profit.
So yes, one of the goals of federal policy has been to try to increase the amount of transmission that's being built, because there's been a perception, and it is true in many cases, that needed transmission projects weren't being built because they were too costly. The utilities weren't undertaking them as they should to ensure system reliability. You've had lots of discussion around that in Washington. So one of the tools in the toolbox is to give utilities who want to undertake these transmission projects a higher rate of return than they otherwise would get. And historically, what you need to show to get that incentive, that extra rate of return, is to show that your project's kind of more risky than other projects. And that it's also just generally an important project. So Northern Pass went into the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and essentially got an approval of that elevated rate. And that rate is being paid by Hydro-Quebec, so that's that payment to Northeast Utilities. It's higher than it otherwise would be.
Okay.
So they get this special incentive. This is it's a very generous profit.
What is it, 12?
12.5%.
And what's the normal rate of return?
So it really depends on the context, but if you're looking at a lot of utility investments, it's around 9%.
That's substantial.
So this is a substantial amount for a $1 billion project. And it keeps coming back. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It keeps coming back as the project is in operation for the life of the project. It's a yearly payment, and so you have this kind of strong incentive for a utility like Northeast Utilities to pursue this.
Okay.
That has been coming under question in Washington recently, and that's a very positive development. That maybe these are too generous. There's certainly a case to be made that very few businesses get 12% guaranteed profit.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm in the wrong business.
And it bears mentioning that there's a substantial argument that 9% is too high in certain circumstances, but the utility industry is a difficult one to make huge margins in. It's not historically been a huge margin industry. So when you get this opportunity to increase, to make an investment and get a lot back for it, you can see why a company like Northeast Utilities might see that as an economic opportunity that they need to take advantage of.
Yes. Okay, so now we've established that PSNH, Northeast Utilities all benefit from this line coming in from Hydro-Quebec, and that there's this really large rate of return to the investors. All right, so there's a lot of profit being generated. And one of the arguments with, I read the newspapers and you have comments from these people about, I can't wait for those towers to be put up because I know we're going to be flooding the state with renewable, cheap energy and my electric bill is going to go down. So, the heck with you all up north, you tree-hugging wackos, right? I've literally read some of these things. It's true. All right, so let's talk about how much the people are going to benefit from this. What kind of deal are they going to see on their electric bill?
It's a great question, and it's one of the things that we've been asking about from the very beginning is what's the benefit to ratepayers, especially given the situation with PSNH right now. What's the benefit? Well, the promise was made 3 years ago to have a power purchase agreement with Hydro-Quebec.
Yes.
To allocate some of the power to be brought down to PSNH customers. We're still waiting for the power purchase agreement.
Really?
Hasn't been decided.
They probably don't want to do that.
I think it's understandable that Hydro-Quebec may not want to do that.
Interesting.
The economic conditions have changed a lot since this project was originally proposed. There has been a massive reduction in the wholesale cost of power.
Okay.
Which means that, to bring it back to what Hydro-Quebec wants, they want to sell their power for which they have very little, they have no fuel costs because it's generated for the most part by water.
Right, but that's
a whole other
question.
It's a whole other issue which we could talk about. But the basic point is that they can sell that power into the grid, and what they're going to do is they'll just basically take whatever price is being offered, and they make that back. It's really not like a fossil fuel fired power plant where there's a fuel cost associated with
well, that's because they just kind of raped the land, right?
Well, there's huge impacts associated with those projects, and they just are accounted for in a different way in the cost structure. They've been subsidized heavily by the Canadian government over the Quebec government specifically over many years.
Okay.
And So now they have a lot. They have a lot of these projects which can deliver the power down, and they make a profit off of those exports. But if the wholesale price of power in New England is as high as it was projected to be back in 2008, they make a lot more money than the projections are now, which are that natural gas will continue to remain at a relatively low cost
Okay.
for the foreseeable future because we have so much new supply in the Marcellus Shale area, Pennsylvania, and New York, and some in that part of the country in Ohio. And so there's much more supply than anyone assumed at that time.
Okay.
Which means that natural gas power is going to be very, very competitive, very, very competitive for a long time. So hydropower is not going to be
It's not even
huge.
competitive right
It's
now.
not even necessarily competitive. And one of the interesting
Okay.
things we've heard from Hydro-Quebec recently, in Connecticut, where there's a big discussion going on right now about whether hydropower should get some type of renewable energy credit.
I know.
There's a discussion going on in Connecticut about this. Hydro-Quebec and Northeast Utilities are participating in that discussion, not surprisingly. And Hydro-Quebec has said in that proceeding that it's a mistake to think of hydropower as cheap.
That's right. That is right.
It's a mistake. Their point is that it is cheaper than other renewables.
Okay.
So there's been a shift in that rhetoric over time to that statement. It used to be, and I think PSNH would continue to say this to people about the benefits of Northern Pass, is that, well, it's cheap hydropower.
Right. That's the.
And
It's not.
it's entirely, certainly there's all the hidden costs associated with it, but just on a monetary basis, there's really no guarantee that it's going to make, a measurable difference in people's bills.
Yeah.
And that's true generally across New England, I think. There's a case to be made, and certainly the power generators did a study on this, an independent study on the economics, and they just estimated that Northern Pass's estimates of how much it would reduce regional energy costs are about twice as generous as they should be. They're really there's really only going to be about half the benefit that was projected.
But what that means in terms of my electric bill,
And
it might be like $10 a year.
It may be less than that. So
Oh my gosh! I can't even buy 2 lattes.
maybe less than that. I mean, there's a really important point here about PSNH customers in particular, because PSNH customers, by and large, still the vast majority of customers are still buying their power from PSNH. The way that this is set up right now, if the power comes down as it's proposed, it bypasses PSNH customers for
There
the
you
most
go.
part. And in fact, it exacerbates PSNH's economic situation.
Really?
So that all the drivers that are increasing PSNH's costs right now, which is that it has a shrinking number of customers and the same costs or increasing costs, that gets worse because more people, if the benefits anywhere near what either NEPCA or Northern Pass assume, that will make a measurable difference in the number of people leaving.
Okay, so the
Leaving
people
PSNH.
who are watching this need to know that there is no guarantee that there will be any difference in your electric bill. But you can be sure that Northeast Utilities is going to make a profit because they're going to charge a certain amount, and you're going to be sure that PSNH is going to make a profit, and the shareholders are going to be laughing all the way to the bank.
Well, it is striking, and one of the main issues with any energy project is there are burdens associated with an energy project, and there are some benefits. You need to have clear commitments to provide benefits, and the burdens, those benefits need to go to the people who are burdened by the project.
But there's no guarantee of that with
But
this
there's
one.
no guarantee. Whereas
Okay.
on the economic side of it, this is a profit-making project first
That's
and
it.
foremost. And so that's really where we've been looking at it and saying, how can you quantify benefits? And the environmental benefits aren't there as we've scrutinized them, and the economic benefits aren't there.
You say that so nicely, and I'm like, hey, let's really get down to business here. You're saying it very nicely. Okay, great. I because we're being kind of pushed along time-wise. We didn't get to our site evaluation committee, and I wanted to kind of get there.
Touch on that for a second. Site evaluation committee is the permitting body for Northern Pass in New Hampshire.
So if they approve this project, they're going to be overseeing the building of the towers.
They will consider an application from Northern Pass for a certificate to build the project, and they will, if they approve the project, they'll grant a certificate with certain conditions on how it needs to be built and precisely where it is. It's really, it stands in for all local approvals and other state permits, and incorporates particularly the state permits. It's designed as a one-stop permitting shop, which sounds pretty developer friendly, and it is, which may also explain the focus on New Hampshire as the place to go.
Really?
So it's a very developer friendly process, and that's by design. We're a state that feels very strongly, has a very free enterprise attitude towards energy projects, especially since the restructuring of the market that I talked about, where the power plants are now all operating in a competitive scenario. So we have this process which really no one in this process really gets to decide, is this project right for the state of New Hampshire? And so this was a discussion in the legislature last year about, are there ways to tweak this process, especially in anticipation of Northern Pass, but also for all energy projects? Are there ways to fix it? And I participated with a group that was working on some changes last year, and we advocated for some of the bills that were filed. There are a bunch of new bills that have been filed as well this year to make some similar changes, particularly to projects that are like Northern Pass, that don't need any other regulatory approval. They don't have this stamp of approval from the regional grid saying we need this.
Right.
It's a profit-making enterprise. And so we've been trying to inject a little bit more care and analysis into that siting process. So that's what we're going to be trying to do in this legislative session.
Okay.
And keep an eye on those bills. And really, one takeaway is to tell your legislators that you want there to be a really robust site evaluation committee process for Northern Pass and these other projects, and that they should take a very hard look at these bills that have been introduced to improve the process.
Mention an energy policy.
So there's also a big discussion in the state about putting out a energy policy, something we haven't had for 10 years since Governor Shaheen, and there are a number of bills on the table that would establish a process to do this, and we think it's a pretty good idea. The state hasn't looked comprehensively at its energy needs and charted a course as to what we want to encourage. We have spent a lot of time in the state with various boards and commissions looking at energy policy issues. The Easy Board, for example, is a body that's looked very closely at this and had some consulting help done. There was an independent study done, and the real takeaway message was energy efficiency should be a first-order resource that we look to. And so we definitely feel that that's a really important policy to put into the state process. It should inform the site evaluation committee process. It should inform all the decisions that the various government agencies make around energy. And, similarly, we should be encouraging local renewable energy that, provides real benefits to communities and economies and improves the environment at the same time. So if we had that type of emphasis, it's really quite different than the Northern Pass model.
Yes.
And, I think that's a discussion the state should have and hopefully will coming out of this legislative session.
So the positive is that we're learning from the Northern Pass how to restructure our energy policies, some of our legislative policies in dealing with these transmission projects.
It's definitely a key issue that needs to be considered as part of the planning process.
Keep doing your good work. And then there's also the undergrounding policies as well, because that way that takes away mitigates all of the damage, at least from the towers.
And that's one proposal that has been made, is to basically require the site evaluation committee to consider an underground alternative.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
let's have a real,
Yes.
robust analysis of what it would mean and where it would go and how it would work. And at the end of the day, you make a well-informed decision.
Okay. All right. I think we need. Our time is running out. For God's sake.
It's a rich topic,
just
Heather.
Keep
And
on going.
I know, and you've already covered a lot of it.
You've covered it all. I just asked the questions.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And we'll have another update when we need one. Right, Christophe?
Sure, anytime.
All right. And if you have any questions, you can go to support us at nonorthernpass.org. You can go to our site at nonorthernpass.org and check out our video with Christophe if you're not already there looking at it. Thank you so much.